Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first workshop of the semester. This is a scripting in Unity workshop. It's basically just programming in Unity. I'm Lawrence, and then some of the board members are also here. Feel free, like if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or type in the meeting general chat. I have two monitors up, so I should be able to answer any questions that go on in that channel as well. All right, and I guess we will. Sure, recording started. Yeah, we'll get started. So first off, I don't know how many are new to the club as a whole. Unity is one of the many game engines that we have, or that are provided. Now, what is specifically a game engine? According to Google, a game engine is a software framework that offers various tools to help development of video games or other 3D related projects. So it could help you with just like showing stuff on the screen. It could help with physics. It could help with compilers. And I add other 3D related projects because other industries are starting to use game engines like Unreal for other projects, depending on what they're trying to accomplish. A lot of VR has been using game engines, and then also stuff even like movies, which we'll see in a bit. One of the game engines that is very popular in our club is Godot. You may see a lot of our members like use Godot or say something like Godot Pog. So Godot is an open source game engine. Yeah, it's an open source game engine that's under the MIT like public licensing or something like that. Basically, you could use it and you don't have to pay money at all. In the past, it used to be very good, only like primarily for 2D games. So if you were thinking of making like a 2D game, this was like the way to go. The programming, in terms of like programming, it's very similar to the language Python. Its syntax is pretty similar, but now they released a Godot 4.0, which can render really like good 3D renders, which probably it would beat. I feel like it's going to beat Unity at some point, but because it's so new, it's not considered industry standard, but it's still like a very solid game engine for people who want to get into game development. Next up is probably something that you've heard of, Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine is probably the most used game engine in the AAA industry. It can create like very realistic looking graphics, like here with Final Fantasy, and it can also be very stylized depending on how you want to approach it. I have two examples down here with Guilty Gear Strive and Sifu, and it's also been used in the entertainment industry. Disney's been using it a lot with their shows on Disney Plus or in movies, like with The Mandalorian. You also have genre-specific engines. There's a lot of like different types of these. The two biggest ones that come to mind for me are RenPy and RPG Maker. RenPy is for dating simulators, and then that one's like free and also open source. RPG Maker, I do believe you have to pay for that, but it provides a lot of like tools that are specific towards those genre of games. And then the one that we'll be using today is Unity. Unity has been used a lot in the indie space. Some AAA and AA studios also use them, and it's also been used a lot in mobile development. Unity kind of gets like a bad rap for like not, or like in general public for not looking as good as like Unreal or something like that, but it could look really good given you place the time and effort into it. However, the engine does have a few controversies that has happened over the past like the past year, with its like new owners or something. I don't keep up with it much, but this is sort of like a nice middle ground between Godot and Unreal for something that's considered like an industry standard and doesn't crash your computer immediately on running. So we're going to start off with some basic programming concepts. Even if you're not a CS major, I think it's still a good idea to know some of the very basics of programming. And we're going to sort of cycle through these, and then we're going to go and see them again when we actually open up the Unity project. So we're starting off with a variable. A variable is the name that holds a value of a particular data type. So that means we'll go into the different types of data types later, but basically it's just a name that holds a value. So like here, this apple represents the value 5. And then the data type is an integer, which we'll see on the next slide. And then some of the different data types that relate to numbers. These are the two like main ones that we're going to be working with today, integers and floats. Integers are whole numbers, so like 0, 1, 2, 3, that type of thing. You can't have decimals in them. And then for floats are numbers with decimals in them, so it's like 0, 0.75 or 0.125 or 1.25, that sort of thing. And it's important to note you can't add integers and floats together. There's some like computer stuff that go into it. I feel like I learned this in class and I forgot. But yeah. And then here's some other variables. We'll be using booleans. So booleans are basically just like true or false. And it's basically just like if it's true, it's true. You just write true or false. There's also strings and characters. So strings are basically like a word or phrase, and then you have to put it in quotation marks. And then characters is just a single letter, like that. We won't be using strings or characters in this workshop, but I think it's just like important to know when you try to use it later on. And then we also have arrays and lists. For this workshop, we're not going to be using arrays or lists, but I think they're also important concepts to know. Arrays hold variables in a set order and size. So think of it as like a container, and then they could hold like different. They could hold like a set number of variables. A list is like an array, but it could hold variables of any type, and it doesn't have a set size. So you can see here with an array, when you declare the array, you're going to set like the number, like its size limit. So you can only have five values here. And then with a list, you can you could put 5 values, but you could also add on more, or you could remove more. And then there's different types of lists depending on what you're trying to do, but that's like something that you could learn later on when you get further into programming. Now we have if statements. So if statements are sort of just like these conditions. If certain conditions are met, then you can run this block of code or this section of code. So let's say if I have a variable with 5 apples, if there are 5 apples, if it's equal to 5 apples, then you're going to say there are 5 apples. If there are less than 5 apples, you're going to say that there are less than 5 apples. And you could say else if they're okay, that shouldn't be there, my bad. Yeah. So you could also like to place different conditions like equal, less than, and greater than, and then less than, or so it's just like different conditions to see like, oh, is the value more or less, or is it true or false? And then this is a continuation of if statements. So you have and or. So you could have two conditions. If they're both true and the condition is an and, it will be true. If at least one of the conditions are true and it's an or, then the block of code will run. And then we also have functions. Functions are sort of like chunks of code that you could use repeatedly. So these two, so this piece of code and then these two pieces of code do the same thing, but it's this is like more condensed, and I'm also just like repeatedly using the same type of code. Are there any questions so far? No worries. All right. So I'm going to go over some basic Unity concepts, and then the thing about these concepts is that even if you're doing a project in Godot, these concepts still apply. So the goal with this workshop is, even though we say it's for Unity scripting, that's just to get everyone to download Unity, you could still apply these concepts to Godot or other game engines, that because they all have these features, they just go about differently on like maybe the syntax is different, like how you type it out is different, that sort of thing. So first off, we have certain functions that are specific to Unity. The start function is basically when the when the script is first introduced into the game. You do this to like sort of set up variables, or to make sure that the character has a certain object or something like that. I'll show an example of a start where the start function goes later. Next up is the update. So anything in the update function runs at every frame. Every frame an update function is called. So everything will be in there. And then we also have fixed update. So this runs like update, but it's at its own pacing. So it's not at the whims of it's not at the pacing of the computer, because frame rates can be inconsistent depending on your computer and how good it is. So you have fixed update, which goes at a consistent pacing. You usually use fixed update for stuff like physics and that sort of thing. You can use update for things like input. And then next up, we have input. So input's a type of command that you could use. So you could get like buttons pressed, or you could get like mouse movement. You could also get controller input, like with the joysticks or the buttons or the triggers. And then you could also get mobile inputs depending on what you're trying to create here. Unity has two versions of the input system. We're going to be going over like the old version or the classic version of the input system. The new version, you need to import it, and that's like a bunch of extra steps to go through. And yeah. But there's a lot of tutorials that discuss the new version if you're interested in looking into that. And then we have vectors. Vectors is an object with both magnitude and direction. This is what Google says. For our use, it's basically it could act as a coordinate or a certain direction. You'll see these in the variables that we declare later on. And then we have raycasting. Raycasting is basically an extension of vectors. Like a beam is shot out in the direction of the vector. So you could use this stuff for like guns or obstacle interference, like to check if something's in front of you. I put an example down here where it's like basically a bunch of vectors are being shot out from the player's point of view, and then what they return is basically what you see. So it's also how cameras, digital cameras, and also how our eyes work. Yeah. And then we also have forces. Yeah, so it's just some type of like push or pull. The strength of the force is dependent on like how much power is provided. You could use this for movement, jumping, any physics related thing, explosion, knockback. There's a lot of stuff that you use forces for in game development, that sort of thing. So and then these two are also like Unity related physics objects. We'll be adding these into the game. And then I'll go more in depth on how they work. So rigid body and box colliders. Rigid bodies basically allow the object that you place to experience force. And then the box collider allows it's like hitboxes. Like you could collide with an object, and it basically tells you like, oh, you hit something or something like that. So now we're gonna try making something. We're gonna break down like a platformer, and then like to its like core components, and then we're going to go into Unity and recreate that platformer. Before we get started on this part, if anyone hasn't already, there's like a few more slides left, but so we're not waiting for people to download. I'm going to reply to my own message. If you guys can download this Unity package real quick. If you can't download it, please let me know. there might be an issue with that, but it's a Unity package. We're going to import it into the game, and then we're just going to see how it works. So you can start downloading that while I'm going through this part. So movement is basically crafted from 3 different components. In a platformer game, basically you want to do running, jumping, and the camera movement. So these are the 3 things that we're going to be sort of like going over and like breaking down how they work. So first off is like sort of the basic left and right movement, sort of the key thing to most platformers. So you kind of want, this is very crudely drawn in MS Paint. Basically, you want the input of the player, and then you want a force to be applied to the player so it can move, back and forth. And then for jumping, another really bad MS Paint drawing, you want an input to tell the player when to jump, and then you want a force to push up the player, and then you also want a raycast to sort of check if the player's on the ground. So it's going to send down a beam of a certain length to see if the player has touched the ground yet. And then lastly, camera movement. This one is probably going to be the easiest thing to program, but we're going to implement it last. It's going to be our vector. You just follow the player's movement, and then we're going to track it. All right. So we're going to start making a Unity project. All right. So here, if you have Unity Hub open, you're going to click New Project, and then you're going to click 3D, and then you can name it whatever you want here. Call it Unity Scripting, and then you can save it in whatever folder, and then just click Create Project. It may take a bit, but if you need help, please.
Wait, do you need a license to open a project? Because my Unity Hub says I have no license activated.
No license activated. Did you log in? There's like a. I'm not sure if there's like a login thing.
You have to make an account with Unity so you can get a personal license.
Yeah, I made an account, but where do I get a license after I made my account?
Could you stream your screen?
Yeah.
Click Manage Licenses on the top right corner.
Oh, yeah.
Add license. Free personal license.
Oh, okay, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Yep. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to unmute or ask in the meeting general chat. Try my best to help out.
Sorry, what's the template we're supposed to use again?
Oh, you use the 3D template.
Is that in like the download, the Unity package? I typed it and I just can't find it.
If you click New Project, it should show 3D Core right here. Is it not showing up for you?
Hold on, I just downloaded the thing. Now my screen's a mess. So,
Oh, okay, okay.
Let me just look at it. Sorry.
All right. So this is a question that was brought in the questions and concerns channel, and I didn't realize it until I've just been so used to it being my default settings. So the first thing that we're going to want to do with Unity Open is edit, and then you want to go down to where it says preferences. Yeah, preferences. So edit preferences, and then you want to go to external tools. Here it's going to say like open by file extension. You want to go click Visual Studio Code. If that doesn't show up, you may want to browse, and then you're going to go through your different. You're going to go through your files and find Visual Studio Code. But if you don't know exactly where it is, it should be fine. I think it should be fine. I think we'll import the scripts and then we'll see how it goes from there. Was everyone able to do that, or I'll give you guys time to do that. You may need to click regenerate project files, and then select embed packages and local packages, and then click regenerate project files. But aside from that, I think should be fine. All right. Now that we have that, this is a basic Unity scene. I'm just gonna go over like what's going on here because there is a lot of information on the screen. So first off, you have your assets down here in your project files, and then you can see if you click on scenes, you see sample scene. If you click on this is basically the scene that shows up right here. This is our scene, and it's basically a 3D space. You can navigate it by holding middle mouse button to move it around or to pan like this. You can also hold right click to rotate your own camera view. And then you could hold it's primarily these two are like the main ways I control stuff. And so there was a way to control it like a first person mode. How do you do that? Because I've mostly been controlling it.
What's that?
There was like a way to control Unity through like a first person type mode, or like with the arrow keys.
Oh,
okay, yeah.
You hold right click. Hold right click.
Hold right click.
Yeah, to look around with the camera.
Okay. I didn't realize you were driving right now. Sorry.
Good. All good.
Mess up your workspace. How do I reset everything? What do you mean by? If you want, could you stream your screen by any chance? Also, no worries. Let me see. Oh, okay. No worries. Go to on the top right corner. You're gonna see something that says layout. Top right corner, or top right corner of the screen itself. You'll see something that says layout. Click on default. There we go. Cool. Alright, so yeah, so that's let's go to Unity. Yeah. And then you can use arrow keys, as Enzo said, to navigate, sort of like you're flying around in Minecraft creative mode or something. And then right here, you're gonna see like everything that's in your scene. So right now we only have a light source, which is our directional light, and then a main camera, which you don't really see anything from the camera's point of view, just because there's like nothing in our scene. All you see is this like horizon or the skyline. So we're going to start adding stuff to our scene. So, and in the assets folder, we're going to right click, and then click import package, and then click custom package. So if you right click, go to import package, and then click custom package. And then here you're going to find where you downloaded this Unity scripting workshop package from earlier. And if you haven't yet, you could download it right here. You can download it right here from this Google Drive. Double click it, and then it's going to ask you if you want to do a bunch of that stuff. You just click import. And then when you have that imported, place a thumbs up in the meeting chat. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Cool. So now you should see, if it imported correctly, you should see these four folders show up, or 3 more folders show up. If you double click on materials, you're going to see these little balls or spheres with different textures on them, and they're just a bunch of lines. If you have, if you import text mesh from, you'll see that. And then if you double click on here, you're just going to see black squares with like a colored border on them. And then for here, under prefabs, you're going to see 2 things called platform and player. I'll go more into like what these do later. And then here you're going to see our scripts. The gun script we're not going to be using today. Right now we have the camera we have the camera controller and the player controller. So first off, we need to set up what is our player exactly. So here, if you go onto the hierarchy, which is where it lists the camera and the directional light, gonna right click and then create a 3D object. So it's gonna, underneath create empty, you're gonna see 3D object. We're going to add in a cylinder. That's going to be our, no, not a cylinder. We're going to add in a capsule. That's going to be our player for now. And then you could name it whatever. I'm gonna name it player, with player, EA, whatever you want to name it. And then here, when you click on this object, player, you're going to see a bunch of details here on the right-hand side of the screen. You're going to see the position. You're going to want to right-click on the position. Never mind. You're going to go to position, change all of these numbers to 0. And then you see it moves the coordinates, the position. Yeah, so what you're going to do is you're going to right-click, go to 3D object, and then add a capsule. And then you can name it whatever you want. In the hierarchy section, yes, thank you. Yeah. And then, yeah. And then you want to go on the right-hand side with the inspector. So this part's called the inspector on the right-hand side. And you're going to want to make sure you click, you make the X, Y, and Z of the position 0. Next up, we're going to add our floor. So, well, this is our, oh, okay, cool, yeah. So, Q and E, move the camera up and down. First person mode. Okay. Second. Okay, so yeah, so player, so we have our player. It doesn't do anything yet, so like if you hit up here, you're going to see this little play button. If you hit play, it's going to switch you to the game view. You can see you can't really do anything. Like if you move the arrows, there's nothing really going on. That's because we haven't coded anything. But there also isn't like anything in terms of like the player itself to do. So we're going to add in like a floor for the player to walk on. So we're going to right click again, create a 3D object, and then this time we're going to make a cube. And then the cube, you want to center it at 0, 0, 0. And then you may want to move up the player a little bit. You could just use the arrows. It doesn't have to be exact. Just create the player, and then you have the floor right here. This is a bit small to be a floor. So what you want to do is like change like the X direction to like widen itself a bit, and then you increase the Z direction so there's a bit more like depth to it, and then you could decrease the Y section so it's a bit thinner. If you need, again, if you right click on the hierarchy, go to 3D object, and then click cube, you're going to add a cube object. And then you could change it X, Y, and Z to 0. And then you could change the scale of the object so it looks more like a platform. When you hit play, you're gonna notice it feels very bright. Like it's very white, so it might be a bit hard like on the eyes. And like if you're playing like a first-person perspective, like you don't really have a good like frame of reference of like how far you're actually moving, unless if you have the edge in sight. So what we're going to do, how do you zoom in? You can scroll with the mouse. That's a pin. You can scroll with the mouse to zoom in and out. You can also scrolling is the best way to do it at the moment. And then once you put in the cube, if you go to the materials folder and then click on this grid red, you can drag it over you could drag it into the scene and then put it over our floor right here. This sort of just like adds some color and then adds some depth. It's sort of a test texture. I usually do this just so my scene doesn't feel like super like bright all the time, because sometimes it just hurts my eyes. But yeah, I think this is just a nice way to do stuff, just so you can add some depth to it. So again, you just want to go to the materials folder and then drag the grid over the red. All right, and then next up, we're going to add the two physics things that I was talking about earlier. So first off, with the player, you want to make sure you click on your player. You can click on it here, or you could click on it in the hierarchy. You should see the hierarchy light up, and you should see the inspector have the name of the player of whatever you want to do right there. So right now, the player already has a collider. This is going to be the capsule collider. So it's in the shape of a capsule right here. You could, we won't be doing, sorry, I like having to burp. We won't be doing it for this project, but you could increase the radius to make the capsule bigger, or you can make it smaller than the actual object itself. This is just like what it collides with. And then for here, we're going to be clicking add component at the bottom, and then we're going to be typing in rigid body. So click on add component and then add in a rigid body. Do not add rigid body 2D. We're just going to do rigid body. For anyone who was wondering at the beginning if it was like between 2D or 3D, if you do make a 2D project in Unity, you're going to have to, everything I say, you're going to have to do it with the 2D instead. So there's like 2D variants of a bunch of these concepts. So you're going to have to do it with the 2D version instead of the standard. So once you have the rigid body in there, you can see that there's there's different things like gravity and other things. So if we click on use gravity and then we hit play, you're gonna see it just kind of like stands there. Nothing's really happening. It's just kind of there. You don't know if it's gonna fall. I don't think it's gonna fall actually. Yeah, I don't think anything's gonna fall. But yeah, we'll see. And then if you let's say like, so this thing has a box collider, it's in the shape of a rectangle. If I remove the box collider, this is what happens to my player. It's just gonna fall to the ground. That's because there's no box collider, so it doesn't know that it could collide with this sort of thing. Yeah, so basically if you click on the floor, or let me label this the floor. If you click on the floor, there's going to be something called the box collider. You could remove, like, there's this little check mark next to the box collider. You could remove it, and then if you hit play, it's going to fall through because there's nothing to collide with, or there's nothing to intersect. Enabling the box collider allows you to select it. You could also remove the capsule collider from the player, and then it will achieve the same effect. Basically, the box doesn't know, the floor doesn't know that something's colliding with it. There. So now we're actually going to start programming our player. So typically how you would want to approach this is you go to the scripts folder, and then you want to right click and then hit create, and then you're going to create a new C# script. We're going to create a new script just for the sake of showing how it works. What happens when you create a new script. So you're going to create a script, and then you're going to name the script. It's best if you name your scripts with no spaces in between, and then any like new any first letter in a name in a word will be capitalized. So you can see with the camera controller or the player controller, there's no spaces, just player with the P capitalized and then controller with the C capitalized. So I'm just going to call this test script, and then you can hit enter, and then the script is right there. And then you could double click it to open in VS Code. Does anyone? Yeah, I'll go over it again. You're gonna right click, hit create, go to C# script, and then you're just going to name it something, and then click enter. Yes, you could use Notepad if you want to code in Notepad. So, Enzo, for your game pitch, I expect you to code it entirely in Notepad. Just watch. And then if you double click on test script, it should lead you to your VS Code, or it should like ask you like, oh, what do you want to open with? And then try to look for Visual Studio Code. And then you should be led to this screen. If you're a computer science major and you've worked with Java before, or if you've taken 1400, it's very similar. At least like the basics are very similar. And we shouldn't be going into anything that would deviate or sort of like go away from Java syntax or how Java works. So it should be very similar. So here we see our test script. We have the void start, and it comes with comments already. Comments are like little notes that you could place on your code. And then here it says the start is called before the first frame update. And then we have our update, which is called once per frame, as I mentioned earlier. So now we're going to go back into Unity, and we're actually not going to use this test script. So we're going to click on our player, and then we're going to drag this player controller into the inspector. Or another way of doing it, you could just click add component and then type in player controller, and then you should be able to enter it from there. And then afterwards, you're going to double click on player controller and open it up. You should see this. Here we have the player controller, and then here we have the variables that I mentioned earlier. So we have the data type, so like a float, and then the float, and then the name of the variable. And then you're going to see that there's something that's like public and private. So when you see a public for in terms of Unity, when you see a public variable, it's going to show up here on the inspector. So you can see that I have a variable called walk speed that's public, and then a variable that's private called move input. So you can see here that it shows the walk speed as public, and then but it doesn't show the move input variable. And basically, you can set the value. I know we showed here on the slides that you could declare, or you could set the value like equal to 5 here in the code itself. But for Unity and like in game development in general, you want to be able to edit the variables yourself. So you could just type in like the value 5 here. So so that will be the same as like placing it equal to 5 on here. So here we have the walk speed of the player. That's how fast the player walks. And then also, if you go here in Unity, I've set it up so if you hover over the variable name, it shows like a little description of what the variable does. This is a nice way to debug, and you can accomplish this through Tooltip. It's okay if you don't do it like with your projects. This is like something that actually, let me send the link. So if you add like these little like I guess commands, it's like nice for like getting your code, nice for showing like code and sort of like making it more approachable. This link kind of goes over a bunch of the commands for the inspector. But that's something that you consider that you do like maybe way later when you have more experience with Unity. You don't necessarily need that for now. For here, the jump force is how much force is applied to a jump. So this is it's basically how high does the player jump. And then the jump input is a boolean that checks if the player, if the spacebar has been hit. And then the jump amount is how many times a player can jump without hitting the ground. Notice how this is an integer because we don't, there's no such thing as like 4.5 jumps. There's not really like a half jump that you could do. So it's going to be whole numbers. And here for player height, we're going to go into this later. This goes into like checking if the player is on the ground or something like that. And yeah. So notice here we have our start, actually no, we have a variable here called private rigid body, and it's called RB, short for rigid body. When you go to when you first start the script, you want your player, or you want your code to be aware of what the rigid body of the player is. So you're going to have RB is equal to the get component, and you're going to have your code look for the rigid body. So that's why this line of code exists. So it's looking for the rigid body, and it basically assigns that component into the RB variable. And then here we have our update function. So this is called every frame. And then we have 4 different functions here. So we have our movement function, we have our direction function, and then we have our jumping function, and dashing I did not implement. We can remove that. Yeah, so we have our movement input. So let's remove the comments here. The comments are the 2 slashes here. You could just remove it like that. And then the movement input should be here. And then you want to control S to save. And then once we do that, we're going to actually look at what the movement input function does. So if we scroll down all the way to the bottom here, you can see this function called movement input. Basically, we go to our move input variable, and then we call the input command. So the input, and then we get axis and horizontal. So when we say get axis and horizontal, it's going to look for, it's going to look if the player has pressed the WASD. It's going to look if it's pressed A or D, or it's going to look if the player is pressing the arrow keys. And then it should know that, and then it places it into the move input. So if the player is moving left, it's going to be a -1. If the player is moving right, it's going to be a +1. And then here we're going to, here we're going to place the rigid body and its velocity. So that's the speed of the rigid body. We're going to set it to a vector 3. And then we're going to place in our movement direction, and then multiply that by our walk speed. And the reason why we have the movement direction, the move input directed by the walk speed. So if you're basically, if you are, this is our player, and then we have the input. If it's +1 times like 5 walk speed, it's going to go to the right pot 5 times or whatever. And then if you're going -1, times the walk speed, you're going to move left. So this gets you the movement that goes left and right. And then you're going to set the RB velocity Y, and then we don't want to move on the Z-axis, which is like forward and backwards, like further away from the camera and closer to the camera, since this is just a platformer. So we're going to set that to 0. Are there any questions? I know I just like said a bunch of words at once. RB is the rigid body. So remember that component that we added that let the player experience gravity so the capsule can fall? Yeah, so basically we're assigning that we're assigning that capsule, and we're telling it that we can move it. We can move it to the left, and we can move it to the right. and then the code knows that that's that the caps that RB is the rigid body because we declared it here. So get component looks through the object that you're the object that. So let's go back into Unity, and it's going to say compiling C# scripts. Depending on what you are doing, it may take a while. And then remember to click on your player, and then scroll to the bottom where it says the player controller script. You're going to want to change the walk speed to some number that isn't 0. Otherwise, you're going to have issues. And then afterwards, you can hit play, see what happens. So you can see this is not exactly what we want. We don't really want our pill just like just falling over like that. And there's a few ways to fix this. So the main way is that we could add constraints to the rigid body. And here you could freeze different things. So you could prevent it from rotating. You could prevent its rotation. You could prevent it from moving. So you want to freeze the rotation of all of these. That way, when you hit start, you can also, that way you remove the rotation and it doesn't just fall over and flop around. And then while you're at it, you can freeze the Z rotation since we don't want it to move backwards and forwards by physics. If there's any questions, let me know. And then place a thumbs up if you were able to place in the constraints for the rotation. Can you give an example for when you want to add these types of rotations? Like just rotations on the rigid body? Yeah, so like something like Fall Guys, it's just like, it's a very like physics-based game. You want the character to be constantly like rotating or being affected by the physics engine. For our cases, we don't really want that. We want the player to just be standing up perfectly fine. Yeah. And remember, you may not see the constraints immediately, so you just have to click on the little arrow next to it to get to the constraints. And then if your character still isn't moving, check the walk speed, or you may need to save on the player controller. So you just go to File, Save, or you could press Control S or Command S if you're on Mac. So next up, we're going to do something, and we're going to add something to our player just to see if it's... we're going to add something to our player. So on the player, on the hierarchy, access the walk stuff for the player. Do you mean the walk stuff in the code or on the inspector? I assume in the code. On the inspector, okay. It should be under player controller if you scroll down to the bottom, and then you should be able to see the walk speed. You may need to, if it's not there, you may need to drag, you may need to hit add a component and then just type in player controller, and then you could access it through there. Were you able to do that? Sounds good. Cool. So now we're going to click on the player, and then we're going to right click, and then we're going to click create 3D object. We're going to add a little spear to our player, and then we could call this face. Name it whatever you want, as long as the spear is inside of the player object like this. So it's like, it's sort of like tabbed out and indented. So we call this relationship like the face is a child of the player. That way, if you move the player itself, the spear moves along with it inside. And then what we want to do with the spear, you just want to click on face itself. Make sure you're not clicking on player. You want to move it up. I swear this wasn't intentional to be Among Us. You can move it out to the side like this. And then we're going to go to our materials and then add a green texture to it just so we can see it and it's not just like one giant blob like that. And then afterwards, once you have that, put a thumbs up, I guess, or if you need help, just let me know. So again, right click on here, click on 3D object, and then sphere. You add in the sphere, and then you name it whatever you want, and then you can move it up and then move it forward, just so we see that that thing indented. And then you want to go to your materials tab or materials folder and then grab it in and then just drag it in like that. You can also put in the red one, whichever like sort of shows like a contrast. My character fell when I tried putting a sphere outside of it. Oh, okay. You may need to stop, I guess hit the play button. Make sure like when you're editing code or like you're doing something, make sure you click on the play button to make sure you're not in play mode, because yeah, things happen. Is there a way to rotate a camera around a specific object? I don't think so, but there is a way to focus on an object. Like if, let's say, you're in a giant open world scene, you want to focus in on a specific object, like a car or something, you could find the scene in the hierarchy, or find the object in the hierarchy, so let's say our player, click F, and it should focus on it. And then you could do that. So that way it's like easier to navigate. There might be a way to do it, but I don't think I'm knowledgeable about that. So I'm gonna hit play, and then basically, whenever I hit the play, it seems to get rid of my platform. So when it's not blue, the platform's gone. Okay. So yeah, this kind of goes into sorry, I forgot to mention that you need to leave play mode. So anytime you edit, it might be that every time you edit the play, the platform goes away because you never it was never in the original version of the editor. So you could just right click and add a new 3D object. Once you're off play mode, just click cube. And as we did before, you could set the position to 0 and all that. And then yeah, set the length and all that. Yeah, just set up the floor again. So when you hit play, no, you're good. This is a learning experience. I struggled a lot when I first learned Unity, so it's all good. So when you hit play, you notice that when you're going left and right, this is why I had the spear on. You're not actually like turning directions. Your character is just facing the same direction all the time. So we want to fix that, and I wrote down some lines of code on how to do that. So here we go back to our player controller. You can either click on VS Code again, or go to scripts and just double click player controller again. And then here we're going to go to our update function, and then there's a thing called direct. There's a comment with the thing that says direction on it. You could remove the variable, remove the comment, and then we're going to see that function called flip character. Can anyone guess what flip character does? It does flip them. Thank you. All right. So we're going to go down to the area where we call flip character. And basically, you see the use, we're going to be using an if-else statement here. So if the player is facing one direction, which is our Boolean, so if the player is facing one direction, and if its movement input is 1 or greater than 0, it's going to flip. Else, if it changes directions and it's moving left, we're going to make it flip again. So let's actually look into the flip thing. So the flip, first of all, changes the Boolean. So when you see an exclamation point, that means the opposite of or not. So if let's see, true, what is not true, that's false. So this is saying this is saying false, basically. So exclamation point is just means not. So, and then we have an if statement here. If it's not, if it's facing left, then we're going to want to flip our character 180. If it's facing right, we could have it, we just have it facing right. You could also, since there's only two options with the true and the false, you could just do this and if else, and it does the same thing. It accomplishes the same goal. I just wrote it down specifically, just if you wanted, just for this example. And now we can go back into our code, or into our editor. So you could save in, you can save. Make sure you save in VS Code after you get rid of the comments here. And then we're going to go back to our thing, and then we're going to hit play. You have a problem? Thank you, Solomon. You could use whatever model you'd like. So, yes. Very cool. I like the... You are very funny, Solomon. Thank you. Alright. So, you can see now that the character flips. And if we're following our code here, you see that if the character is facing, sorry, yeah, the character's facing right, it does that, and it flips back and forth. There's definitely a better way to logic that, but I was procrastinating on this workshop. I'm sorry if we missed it when we changed it, but the character wasn't flopping and dragging. Like, is it rotating or like falling over, that sort of thing? So it stands up, right? Oh, yeah. So yeah, no problem. If you go to player, your player, and then go to the rigid body, you want to look for constraints, and then you want to click on, it might be closed in. You want to click the constraints and then freeze rotation. So now is probably the most complicated part of the workshop, but it shouldn't be too bad. We're going to go into the jumping, how to get your player to jump. So here we have our jump on our update. Sorry. So we're going to go into our jump input. We're going to remove the comment there, and then we're going to go to our jump input code. So here, our jump input function seems very standard, straightforward. So if we get the input, if the player ever presses the space bar, which is right here, and if they're ready to jump, and if their current amount jump is 0. So that was just a bunch of variables that we placed down. So these variables, ready to jump, is basically here. Why do I have ready to jumping variable? Yeah, so basically basically a boolean saying the player can jump and still has some jumps left. And then here on current jump amount, it's going to be, you want to make sure that it's greater than 0. So you may see here in the start function, we have the jump amount, which is what we declared here on our thing, like how many jumps the player has, and then current jump amount. So this keeps track of how many jumps your player currently has. So like if you have 3 jumps, if you have a triple jump, your character uses 1 jump, your current jump amount will be 2, uses another jump, the current jump amount will be 1. And basically we're just checking if it's not 0, because we don't want the player to keep jumping if it's 0. And then we're going to like jump input and true. And then you're going to see this thing called debug.log. I'll show you what that does once we go to the jump function. So now that we know that's true, let's look into our fix update, because this code alone doesn't actually get the player to jump. Like the player doesn't do anything if we do this. So if we look in our fixed update function, because jump uses physics, we're going to do all of our physics related stuff in fixed update. So if the jump button is pressed, then the player jumps. So now that this is true, the player will jump. And then we're going to go to our jump code right here. So immediately we want to set the player jump input to false. That way the player doesn't keep jumping after every frame. And then also we want to basically reset our Y velocities. That way the jump, this is like, how do I put this? We want to reset our Y velocity, which is the vertical force, the vertical speed of the player. That way the jump doesn't just like stack on top of the jump that we already have and it doesn't go out of control. And then we're going to add our force here. So rigid body, add a force, and then we're going to put transform.up, which is a vector, like a transform in the vertical direction going upward, and then we're going to multiply that by our jump force. I think that's okay. And then force mode, impulse. There's different types of force modes, and then depending on what you want to do. So there's acceleration, force, impulse, and velocity change. We're going to be using impulse in this instance, and then there's like some other things. I can show you the other force modes through documentation. And then we're going to subtract our current jump amount. So with this with this variable, an integer with a minus minus, so you subtract that integer by that integer by 1. So it's the same. Doing this is the same as typing current jump amount equals current jump amount minus 1. These two are the same function. It's just this one's a shorthanded way of doing it. Cool. And then, so that gets our player to jump. But if you see, but we need to make sure that like they touch the ground, and when they touch the ground, they get all their jumps back. So that's why we have this grounded variable. So the grounded variable, you're going to send a raycast, and basically how this works logistically, this is our player. And we're basically sending the raycast. Let's see. So transform position. So that's the player's position. Vector 3 down, and then 50% of the player's height times 50% of the player's height, and then what is ground. So basically, what it's going to do is it's going to create a raycast starting from here, going all the way down, and then basically just checks here: is the player touching the ground? Yeah. And then we have, so it will be true. And then if the player is not touching the ground, then it's false. And then we have here to reset the jump. And then if we reset the jump, we're going to set ready to jump to true again, although we've never really set it to false. I don't know why it's there. And then we reset our jump count. So that way we have all 3 of our jumps back. Right. And then you may notice here, like we have like this little velocity thing. This is physics. I don't like physics, but we have to do it because game dev is basically physics and computer science. So when you jump, when you're jumping, your velocity, like your speed of your jump, just slowly. It gets slower over time until it becomes a negative speed. So at this point, at like the peak of your jump, it's going to be a 0 velocity. So that's why your Y velocity is a 0, which is what we're looking for here. So your Y velocity is 0, and then that means you're falling. So the reason why I implemented this code is because if we remove it, save it. You don't have to do this. I'm just showing it for demo purposes. Let's say jump force is 10, force is 2, jump amount 2. So I put a jump amount of 2. we're going to do this. Basically, it's gonna happen. Second. It's going to give you an extra jump because yeah, you can't see it here, but it gives you an extra jump. There's some issues that come with it. Just because it checks too quickly, it checks like the instant you leave. So the instant you leave, there might be some, it might be leaving. So it's better to just reset the jump when you're grounded and your velocity is already confirmed at a negative. And yeah. So as you can see, we could save. We don't need the same code. We could save it, and then we'll go back into Unity, and then you could set your jump force to like 5 or something, jump amount to 2, and then yeah. So let's hit play. And now you notice you can't jump anymore. So the main thing with this is that here you may have noticed on the jump. Sorry. You may have noticed on the check there was something called what is ground. So this is another Unity concept called layer mask, and basically you can assign different objects into different layers. So if you go click on the floor and then click on the inspector, right now the layer is default along with the player. Like everything just has the default layer. But you want to tell the game or the computer that this is the floor. I want it that when the player touches the floor, they're going to jump again. So we're going to go to layer, and you don't really see an option for like floor or ground. So we're going to add a layer, and then we're going to type in ground, and then we're just going to click save. We're going to go back to floor. This is kind of inconvenient. And then we're going to change our thing from default to ground. And then from here, we're going to go to the player, scroll down, and then it says here, what is ground? We're going to say the ground is the ground layer. So here we're going to create a layer mask, and then you click add layer. You just type in ground or floor or whatever you want to name it. Then we go to floor. We make the layer to ground. And then when you go back to player, you're going to click what is ground, and then you select ground. So now that we have all of this, we have a fully functional, like very basic platformer. You could increase the speed if you want. Increase like the jump force. You can set on 7, so the player jumps a bit higher. So you can give it like as many jumps as you want. Player height, and all of that. So it's nice because you don't have to go back into the code and just like have to edit it again, and then you can leave the code, and then you have to go through all of that. But now we kind of have this thing where off the screen, or you jump out of screen. Now, the last part, as I mentioned in the slides, we want to go into controlling the camera itself. Yeah, so now we want to go into controlling the camera. So we have a script for that. If you click on the camera, you're going to see the camera view. We go click on the script, and then we want to add component. We're going to type in camera controller. You're going to add in your camera controller. So we're going to open up we're going to double click on camera controller, and we're going to open it up so we can see what's going on here. So make sure you add the camera controller to the main camera. So you can just click on main camera, just add the camera controller script, and then we're going to go into our code. All right, so now that we're in the code, we're going to look at it's a very small script and it's fairly simple. we're going to have a public transform player. So this is basically you place the player into the variable, and then it's going to track. Sorry, it's going to track the player's movement, and then we're going to have an offset, and it offsets the camera to make sure the player doesn't. So make sure that the camera is just not like straight up in the player's face, because otherwise you don't see anything. And then we're going to have a smooth factor. So I'll show what exactly it is. Because if you want, like realistically, if you want, let's say I disable the script, we don't have a script. If you want the camera to follow the player, there's a very easy way to do this without code. You could just drag the camera so it's a child of the player, and then you move it like this. But you can see a few issues with this. So first off, the lighting's changing. Why is the lighting changing? Because every time we move back and forth, the camera changes rotation. It's almost exact. We don't want that, so that's why we're going to do it here. And so I'm going to drag this back out. You didn't need to do that part. I'm going to put back the script. So here we're going to put in the follow. You want to remove the comments from the follow function, and we're placing this in fixed update because we're going to go into our follow function. So we're going to get a vector 3, and that's the target's position. So in this case, a vector 3 is just the coordinate in a 3D space of where the player actually is, and then we're going to add our offset to that vector 3 to the player's current position. And then we're going to do something called smooth position. And then this is basically going to smooth out the camera movement, and that allows us to have like more fluid camera movements, because sometimes cameras can be very rigid. Or I'll show you basically what we do. And then we change the position of the camera right here. So I'll show you right here. So what you want to do is get the player and then drag it all the way here to the camera controller, where it says player. You drag it in here, and it should say player parentheses transform. And then if I don't set any of the variables, if I just leave it as offset and I put a 0 smooth factor and we hit play, you're going to see it doesn't do anything. I messed up. We're going to set the smooth factor to 1. And then you can see the camera just goes to the player's point of view, which is why we have the offset. The offset is going to be 5. I don't know how much, like -10 in the Z direction. And then if we set it to 10 here, now we have our camera working. 5. We'll set it to 2. Why did that crash? Okay. Yeah, so now we set it to 2, and you see the camera very follows the player almost exactly, right? And then you can what you can do is that you can change this slider. And we get this slider because on the script I placed something called the range, and it allows you to have like a slider. That way you can set a limit on how much you want to place it. If we want, we can make this more precise, that sort of thing. We could say we can make it to like 100 or something, but for the sake of this, we're just gonna leave it at 10. So I put the slider, we're gonna put it at like maybe, let's put it at 1, so, just so you can see the extremes of how it works. So whereas the previous camera, like it's like very strict and followed the player, this camera is more like, I don't know if you guys played Ori in the Blind Forest. It like basically smooths out and it doesn't follow the player exactly. And you can tighten the camera movement by sort of just like playing with the slider, seeing what works for you. I like the 5. It's like a nice in-between. So it feels like there's a bit of a delay, so it feels you can do that. So without the code, when you input the things into Unity, would it not work? Like input the camera movement to Unity? I think so. If you're asking, so basically this code, how do I give the player to the camera skip? You just go, you can just drag the player from the hierarchy and then drag it into here, into the player. So without the code, you could place the walk speed. So the code allows us to have like the walk speed variables available. So like I'll place like the walk speed here, and then you can set the walk speed on the player here. Does that make sense? Or did I understand the question correctly? And then for Andrew, yeah. And then for Andrew, you can also go here in the player, where it says like player. You can just click here and then look for your player variable's name. And then, or you could just drag it into here and it should be able to keep track of the player. Yeah, the code, yeah, as Enzo said, and as Solomon said, yeah, the code basically, the player is pretty much just a shape, and there's like nothing to like sort of define the player in that sense. And then, yeah, so now you have a very basic working platformer that you move back and forth. But you want to add more platforms. Now this is where prefabs come in. So you see this floor. You don't want to keep on like either you can duplicate it. You can duplicate it by clicking on it and clicking Control D. But then like if you change, like let's say I want to change the size of this floor. I want it to be taller. Bad example. Let's say I want to change the size of this floor, or like the height of the floor. I want it to be a little bit taller. This is just a bad example. Let's say we want to make a new scene, like an empty scene, and we want to place all of these assets onto here. Let's say make a scene, new scene. You don't have to do this part. I'm just showing for example. And then now we have to set up our character all over again. Like you don't want to have to set up your, you don't have to want to have to redo the work every time you're setting up a new scene. So what we do is something called prefab. So if you take something from the hierarchy and then drag it to here in the assets folder, you could place it in the prefabs folder. Usually I like to organize my prefabs together. You could place it here in the prefabs folder. And then you can also place the player here, player yay. And then you click on scenes, you go to your new scene. You could add back the floor and then add back the player. And it has all of the same rules that you applied from earlier. And plus, if you make edits to the player, like let's say I make the player like with a walk speed of 10. Yeah. With a walk speed of 10, and then we save it here, and then we go back. So if we go back to this other scene, like the original scene that we had, the player has that walk speed of 10. So it's the same. It shares the rules throughout the project. And then you could go ahead and add more platforms as you'd like, if you'd like. So I want to add this, and then I could rotate it by the Z-axis. Like that. Let's add another platform here. Yeah, that's and then you can hit play, and then you have a platformer. Yep, pretty much. Yeah, so you basically made Mario. Congrats. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the workshop. I'm actually going to send, actually, let me send some links right now. So a lot of software engineering, and a lot of programming in general, you basically just Google stuff. Like I know, I don't know if you guys were at the Sony Santa Monica guest speaker. I know they mentioned something like at some point it will be like you can't Google stuff anymore. But since we're learning the absolute basics of game development, and this is how I created some of the games that I've made, Googling, just Google whatever. Like, the more you Google, the more you learn. There's a lot of resources out there. Yes, this will be recorded and you could watch as reference. There's a lot of resources online, and these are two YouTubers I really like to watch. And you can just Google whatever. So like for me, let's say I want to learn Unity first person shooting. There's multiple first person shooter scripts to learn. Brackeys is a so basically he was talking about how like bug fixing in the bug fixing after you ship a game. So after you release a game and there's bug fixes. Sometimes like it's so hard because like the code's already compiled. You have to like use PlayStation specific hardware and you have to like test it like piece by piece, and that documentation isn't available online just because PlayStation doesn't want their documentation of how their system works available online. So that's what he meant by he doesn't Google stuff. But like in general, like even like in the professional workspace, like most of the time you're just like Googling stuff. Yeah, it isn't easily available. Yeah, sorry, that's a better way to put it. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to Google a lot of like Enzo, you have an internship. You just like Google stuff all the time for it, right? Yeah.
Why you have to out me like that, man?
I didn't mean it like you don't, but like for all of our programming projects, like especially like when you're upper division, like you'll end up using like Google, Stack Overflow a lot, and that sort of thing. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. But yeah, so there's a lot of resources out there. For Brackeys, he stopped making YouTube videos, but a lot of his tutorials still apply to Unity today. Like even though like he stopped like 3 years ago or something. Yeah, you can see his little goodbye video. But yeah, a lot of stuff that Brackeys has a lot of stuff. I Heart Game Dev is the more recent channel. They go over like a lot of like programming concepts that are like really good to know for object-oriented stuff. That's just wanted to move on. Makes sense. But yeah, a lot of different concepts that are like really good. Just like even if you're not going into game development, a lot of these concepts are like really good for software engineering as well, like the observer pattern, command pattern, and that type of stuff. State machines, those are all really important concepts for programming. So he kind of breaks it down into like these like nice like most of them are like 10 to 30 minute videos, but they're all like really good. And just anything you could just like Google and figure out stuff. You can also go to the Unity documentation if you want to learn how something how something works specifically. I'm gonna put this link down here. Yeah, so there's documentation for Unity. Like if you go to the scripting API, I could just like learn input or typing in this input. I could get everything I need to know about the input system and the different types of like things here, like input get access. That's like what we mentioned earlier, and all of that. Yeah. There's a lot of resources available online, and then this club is also a resource. Feel free to ask any questions in general, or in the lobby channel, or in questions and concerns, or even here, just like wherever you feel like is appropriate. You guys can ask questions, and then yeah, that's pretty much it. A lot of these skills are also applied to Godot. Like Godot has vectors, Godot has raycasting, Godot has input. It's just like it's a different set of documentation. But it should all be the same nonetheless. So there's going to be a few game projects. If you're interested in best resources to learn programming better, honestly, I would say just practice. Like just do a bunch of projects, and then like you sort of just like get a handle of like different programming concepts. For me, like honestly just like googling stuff just like helped me solve a bunch of my problems. But if you're, are you did you just switch to CS this semester? Last semester? Okay, yeah. Like you're still going to be going through like the classes and then like the basics of programming. So once you get like a grip of that, then they'll start giving you more projects. Yeah, object-oriented programming, that's an important one. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the workshop. You guys want to stay, you're free to stay. You're welcome to go as well. Yeah. All right. Yeah, so there's a bunch of resources. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the conclusion. There's a lot of resources available online. Like the internet is really good for all of this. It's difficult. Yeah, it's a bit hard to do. Like programming is a bit difficult to learn at first, but like once you get the basics down, you start being able to make a bunch of stuff. And if you'd like to see what games the club has made, I'm gonna send a link right here. And then if you'd like to join a game project, we have our game pitch meeting on Tuesday, and then that's where teams are presenting their ideas for what types of games they want to make. And then you could join a team from there. We'll have more details on how to join the team during the actual pitch meeting itself. But yeah, I think even if you're not going into software engineering, or even if you're not going into game development, I still think like joining a game project is like a great like way to just practice coding and like sort of like practice like object-oriented programming and other programming concepts. So there's a bunch of games that people made here. Unfortunately, we don't have anything before 2020 because there's sort of like a massive cutoff with the teams. But yeah, that's pretty much it.